You know, every living thing, from the tiniest microbe to you and me, is really just a massive collection of cells. And every single one of those cells has this huge job. It's got to control its borders. It needs to let the good stuff in and kick the bad stuff out. If it fails, it dies. So how on earth does it manage this incredible balancing act?
So let's think of a cell like a tiny, bustling city, right? It's got to import all these essential resources, things like oxygen and food, and it has to export its waste, like carbon dioxide. The cell membrane, that outer layer, is basically its super smart border control. In this explainer, we're going to see exactly how it manages all of that vital traffic.
So how do they do it? Well, cells have this awesome toolkit with three main methods to control who gets a visa. First, you've got diffusion. That's the simple go-with-the-flow method. Then there's osmosis, which is a special rule that applies only to water. And finally, active transport, the real powerhouse method for when you need to move things against the current. Let's break each one down. First up, we've got the simplest method of all, diffusion. This is kind of like the default setting for how small particles get across the membrane. And the best part for the cell? It's totally passive. It costs absolutely zero energy. Okay, that sounds super technical, right? But what does it actually mean? Well, just remember that every particle in the universe is constantly jiggling around. They've got what we call kinetic energy. Diffusion is simply what happens because of all that random movement. Particles just naturally spread out from where it's crowded to where it's not until everything's evenly spaced. Here's a super simple way to think about it. Imagine you're in a room and someone opens a bottle of perfume in the corner. At first, the smell is really strong right there. But give it a little time and those perfume molecules will bounce around and spread out until you can smell it everywhere in the room. That's diffusion. The particles are just moving down what's called a concentration gradient, from high concentration to low. So can we speed this up or slow it down? For sure. There are four main things that affect the rate of diffusion. The more surface area you have, the more doors there are for things to pass through. The hotter it is, the faster those particles jiggle around. The steeper the gradient, so a really big difference between crowded and empty, the faster they'll move. And of course, the shorter the distance they have to travel, the quicker they'll get there. And this brings us to one of the most important ideas in all of biology. Seriously, the surface area to volume ratio. Take a look at these cubes. The giant cube and the 8 small cubes have the exact same total volume. But look at the surface area. The smaller cubes have double the surface area. This is precisely why our cells are microscopic. It gives them a huge surface area to get nutrients in and waste out super fast. All right, so we've got diffusion down. Now let's zoom in on a really special and super important type of diffusion. It's called osmosis. And this one is all about water, and only water. The official definition can sound a bit tricky, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Water tends to move from where there's a lot of free water molecules to where there are fewer free molecules, because they're all busy dissolving other stuff, like sugar or salt. We call this concept water potential. So pure water has a very high water potential. Water with lots of sugar dissolved in it has a low water potential. And the rule is simple. Water always flows from high potential to low potential. So what's the secret sauce here? It's the cell membrane itself. It's what we call partially permeable, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a picky gatekeeper. See how it has these tiny little pores? They're big enough for small water molecules to slip right through, but they're way too small for bigger things like sugar molecules to get through. This basically creates a one-way street for water, causing it to rush over to the side with less free water. Okay, so this process is super important. But what happens when an animal cell, like one of ours, is in the wrong environment? Well, because they don't have a protective cell wall, the results are pretty dramatic. If you put an animal cell in pure water, water rushes in, and it swells up and bursts like an overfilled water balloon. But in a really concentrated salty solution, water rushes out, and the cell shrivels up. Yeah, both of those are deadly. But plant cells, they've got a secret weapon, a strong, rigid cell wall. So when a plant cell takes in water, it swells up and gets really firm and stiff. We call that turgid. But that tough wall stops it from bursting. This internal water pressure, or turgor pressure, is literally what helps a plant stand up straight. On the flip side, if a plant cell loses too much water, it goes limp and flaccid, and that's why the whole plant starts to wilt. So we've covered the free ride methods of transport, the ones that don't cost any energy. But what happens when a cell needs to fight against the current? We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, if you're finding this helpful, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to Spotwork Learning for more key biology breakdowns just like this.
All right, so we've seen how cells can just let things drift down a gradient for free. But what if a cell needs to collect something that's already more crowded inside the cell than outside? Well, for that, it's got to spend some energy. And that's where active transport comes in.
Check out this chart for a second. It's a bit of a puzzle. It's showing the concentration of different ions in pond water compared to inside a plant's root cells. Now, look at the bar for potassium. It's way, way higher inside the cell. So, how in the world is that possible? If it were just diffusion, all that potassium should be leaking out of the cell, not piling up inside. And the answer to that puzzle is active transport. This is the absolute key point. It's the process of moving stuff against its concentration gradient. You're moving it uphill, from low concentration to high. And that just can't happen on its own. It's like pushing a giant boulder up a hill. It's going to take some serious effort. And for a cell, that energy comes from respiration. So how does the cell actually do this heavy lifting? Well, studied in the cell membrane are these special things called carrier proteins. You can see it in the diagram here. A specific ion, like nitrate, fits perfectly into the carrier protein. Then, the cell uses a burst of energy in the form of ATP to make the protein change its shape. And boom, it literally pumps the ion across the membrane and into the cell, even though it's already crowded in there. It's amazing. Okay, so we've gone through the 3 big ways cells manage their borders: diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Let's put them all side by side one last time to really lock in these ideas.
This table really nails the key differences. The biggest dividing line is energy. Diffusion and osmosis, they're passive. No energy needed. They just go downhill with the gradient. Active transport, on the other hand, is the total opposite. It requires energy to go uphill against the gradient. The other big difference is what's being moved. Diffusion is for lots of small things. Osmosis is only for water, and active transport uses these super specific protein pumps for certain molecules. Altogether, this toolkit gives the cell total control.
Think about it. Everything from your brain firing off a thought to a plant pulling nutrients from the soil to grow, it all depends on these microscopic gates working perfectly every second of every day. It's a pretty wild thought. What's the very first thing that would fail in your body if all these transport systems just stopped? And that's our deep dive into how stuff moves in and out of cells. We really hope this breakdown helps you get a handle on this crucial topic. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next explainer from Spotwork Learning.